Welcome to Entangled Life, this program that started last month in May. This is the second appointment, and the topic is Discovering Biomaterial in Art and Society. As you know, this program is meant to be a space for connection and conversation on topics that are about art and society in connection with the climate crisis or the polycrisis that we are living, that has multiple shades and consequences that I thought it was good to talk about, and biomaterials and everything about materials specifically that look like plastic. It's a very intense topic. So without further ado, you know that we have incredible people talking today. And you have the full bio in the paper, of course, and I will just name them because we want to talk, so we are a bit out of pace. And so we have Martina Hynan, and we have Eileen Hutton, and we have Tanja Narancic. I wasn't sure where the accent was going, and I will start asking Tanja, that is our scientist. So, what are biomaterials, and how, what do you do with them?
Okay. So I would like to welcome you all and thank Christina for having us here. And as a scientist, this is not a very natural environment for me, so be nice to me. When I said to one of my PhD students, or in front of him, that I was going to do this, and I said when I hear art, I get a bit panicky. And he's like, oh, but you said you wanted to be an actress. So yeah, that's as far as my understanding of arts go. So Christina asked me to talk about biomaterials or kind of define them, introduce them. And what would I normally do is go and look for a definition. And there are two main definitions of biomaterials. One of them refers to using these materials in medicine mainly, but that's not what we're here to talk about. So biomaterials, it just mainly refers to something that's of natural origin. And as Christina kind of teased out, I work with biomaterials. I train bacteria to produce biomaterials. And the reason why we want to do this, well, as a human population, we're very much dependent on use of certain materials. One of them would be plastic, cement, and we know that there are so many negative things that are connected to production and use of these materials. And I will focus on plastic, and I'm not going to be very bold, but maybe I will. There's a plastic bottle. We sit on plastic chairs. This is plastic. So plastic is all around us, right? But the way that we use this plastic in a way of single-use culture, and the way that we dispose of plastic has created huge environmental problems. Plastic is produced from a finite resource, crude oil, and we use crude oil to produce many other things, including pharmaceuticals, for example. So we need to decouple our need for these materials and these molecules from the use of crude oil, because we're running out of it, and we do not give Earth enough time to make more of it. So here comes our bacteria. Our bacteria. I suppose I own them. And what we try to do is make all these wonderful molecules that have some application. Now, I was talking to Eileen earlier, and my goal is not really to make plastic that can be then used to make a bottle. I want to know why bacteria make these materials. I want to know how do they regulate these processes. And how can we then harness them to make these materials in the end. So, this is just a bonus to make it, but I'm personally more interested in how do they make them, why do they make them, and how do they regulate the process. And when I talk about bacteria and I talk about these wonderful molecules, some of them are displayed there, but I would assume that in a room of this size, we'd have a large number of people that really love cheese, for example, right? So if you look at cheddar, which is one of the major dairy products in Ireland, you would frequently see on them kind of crystals. It looks like salt, whitish, right? So that's not salt. It's lactic acid that bacteria make. So to make yogurt, to make any dairy products, we use cultures of bacteria that make this lactic acid. And lactic acid gives the texture, taste to these products, right? But then it was recognized that this lactic acid has so many other awesome properties, and now it's widely used in cosmetics. So if you go and buy some cosmetic products and you turn around, you'll see that there is lactic acid. It's used for peeling, because it's biodegradable, blah, blah, blah. And lactic acid is also used as one of the monomers to make polylactic acid, which is a polymer. Now, bacteria don't make this polymer, but chemically, you can use lactic acid that's produced by bacteria and make this polymer. And if you buy certain foods, I can name names, can I?
Sure.
I'll charge them later. I've seen, for example, Happy Pear use food packaging, like the plastic transparent one that's made of PLA, and you will see sometimes when you turn around and you see the number, I think number 7 designates polylactic acid. What's the difference? You would wonder. Well, it's produced biologically, partly, and also it can biodegrade. So it's not only that, you're destined to use mechanical recycling, which we know works only to a certain extent, but you can send it to industrial composting, so you can have a different option to manage this plastic. Moving away from that one, this is my bread and butter, the plastic that you see there, and it's produced by bacteria completely, so they make the monomer, but they also make a polymer. And for the ones that maybe are not that familiar with what a monomer is, I took my son's toy, which is a fantastic game. So these are magnets, right? And if you think that this is a molecule, like lactic acid or hydroxyalkanoic acid, which is nothing else but a fatty acid that has a particular group on it, bacteria then combine them together. Oops, yeah, that's not it. And then you get a chain, and that's a polymer, right? So why bacteria make this polymer? Like us, we eat, and then there are periods when we don't eat. So our body then takes some of the excess of food and make a polymer inside our body that we can then access when we are peckish, put it that way. Bacteria make this polymer similar to that, so they make it as a carbon and energy storage, and when there is a need, they can break it down. But when you take this polymer out of the cell, it looks like plastic, it performs like plastic. And that is what we would like to exploit to make plastic. And we did, you can see the pen, and I know it's a kind of just a token of what we can use this plastic for, but it can show you that, you can bacterially produce the polymer, you can use it to make something that is of value, and this plastic can be then biodegraded when we don't need it anymore. And I could talk about my science forever, but I doubt that you want to listen only to me, so I'll give the mic now to Eileen, I think.
Yes, so I can record.
And I'll be delighted only to talk more about polymers.
Well, Eileen, you have quite a different approach to this, and you work especially with a pedagogical approach to biomaterial. Would you like to?
Yeah, so I suppose I'm an artist and I'm head of art and ecology at Burren College of Art. We are right in the middle of the Burren, so we're I suppose are part of a wider community that's looking at conservation and stewardship, and there's a lot of forward-thinking ways in which people relate to the landscape, principally through like farming practices, if you know Burren Bio. And we're coastal, the college is in Ballyvaughan, and it's coastal. So a lot of our students are not from the Burren, you can imagine that. So I think one of our approaches towards pedagogy is kind of looking at place-based engagement, and how do we get students to kind of feel connected to place. And we look at eco-phenomenological kind of methods, but we also look at a lot at citizen science, right? So this kind of place-based approach to art practice comes through deep engagement. And one of those things that's kind of come out of that is we would participate in Coast Watch Survey Ireland every autumn. You can all do it. It happens between September and October. And basically there's a citizen science sheet, and you go out and you record certain data and do a bit of a beach cleanup. And one of the things about the Burren, for those of you who don't know, it's a karst limestone landscape, right, that was formed about 340 million years ago, down in a kind of a Bahamian climate, closer towards the equator, right? So this limestone, you can touch it, right? Touching 340 million years. You can see fossilized coral. It's like someone scattered confetti sometimes. Like it's really palpable, that deep geological time. And I think I'm coming at an approach from engaging with plastics through this idea of deep time. So when we are doing these beach cleanups, right, 340 million years old, I'm going to pull out some things, even just by sight. Here's limestone, right? Not limestone, but plastaglomerate, right? And so this is now part of our geological record, right? It's part of one of the indicators of the Anthropocene. So we have now taken 340 million years old plastic that in its kind of original form was developed around 1946, say, in its original form, is now compressed in time and space with this. So we're kind of building almost like a future time. It's like a mirrored time scale. And for me, that is radically fast, way too fast for an impact for humans to be making. So when we're doing our beach cleanups through Coast Watch Survey, I suppose I'm getting students to kind of think about materiality and think about this, what's happening in the studios, basically. Like what are we doing in our studios? What's the lifespan of the material? And there is, I suppose, I'm asking the students to be kind of accountable in terms of the materials that they're using. But I'm also interested, again, in that kind of place-based material relationship that develops out of a living material. So working with bioplastics, I've taken a few notes because it gets a little, so I think like plastics, as it was originally termed, was meant to kind of refer to anything that was moldable, meltable, shapeable, right? And that comes in a synthetic form when materials, petrochemical materials, are often transferred through like a heat-intensive process or something that kind of radically transforms them from their original state, right? And then you're talking about a natural plastic, so your shellacs, right, that the beetles make, the lac beetle. You're talking about rubber. You're talking about Gouda pecha that comes from a natural rubber tree. But then also maybe other types of resins. I might pass this around. This is from a beehive. And it's a type of resin that these bees are making from the sap of trees, from wax, and it has this unbelievable smell. Actually, I had said to Martina when we were talking earlier about the smell. But the ways that, like, I think I'm asking students to kind of think about the ways, the kind of evocative potential of materials, right? So not just how natural plastics already exist and how we might work with them, but what does it mean to kind of think alongside a material, right? So we would be using, I suppose we would be repurposing, looking at waste streams, right? So using that industrial marine plastic that washes up in Galway Bay and arrives in Fenor Beach every year by the shocking amount. Like we pull off loads of industrial marine plastic. So repurposing that in artistic practice, so kind of closing a waste stream, revaluing devalued or degraded plastics. But then also working with gelatins, right? So collagen, looking at, there's like the natural plastics, these kind of bioplastics can exist through plants. You're talking about cellulose, animals, collagen, gelatin, fungi, agar-agar, carrageen, right? That would have been a really valuable food source, especially on the west coast of Ireland. So kind of looking to those heritage practices and uses of those materials and building them into the studio as well. Fungi and then bacteria, as Tanja was just talking about. So there's a range of applications or kind of material uses that bioplastics can have. I get quite excited by that potential to not only I think we're at a critical turning point in terms of how artists and practitioners and research can lead us to reimagine materials. Materials that grow, materials that degrade, materials that change. I was just saying to a few people earlier, we have this, I think, kind of built into this capitalist society, this kind of need for things to exist forever. Why? I've made some shocking art that I don't want to see, So let's kind of embrace that potential for things to kind of slowly, go back in. Or I think there's a way to change the relationship to materials. We're talking about single-use plastics as well. It might be a perfect model. It might be a perfect plastic. It holds the thing and it doesn't go away and it exists forever. But the ways in the ecosystem that plastic exists within is fallible. And we need a new way to kind of imagine our relationship to materials, growing, decay, longevity. Let's imagine kind of short-lived materials. Let's value kind of things that are transient or ephemeral, that don't last in a mirrored reciprocal time scale to these kind of petrochemicals that are all around us.
That's definitely a fantastic point of view. We had artists that were embracing this approach, their art. Martina, you at some point started to work with
Sorry, I get this.
At some point, you decided to start to work with biomaterial, work with through your research. Can you tell us about your journey?
So my research, my PhD is in interdisciplinary research with our practice project, and I was looking at our changing relationship with birthplace over time, over the 20th century. So we went from at the beginning of the century where birthplace and home place were synonymous. By the mid-century it was kind of half and half, and now 99% of births are in institutional settings. And actually I live in County Clare and there are no maternity services there and haven't been since 1987. So I had this nagging question about, does it matter where we're born? Does birthplace matter? What does birthplace mean to us? And so I began by interviewing people who had either been born or had given birth or who had children born in the region. They live in County Clare, but of course their children were not born in County Clare. And I was asking them, what does birthplace mean to you? And I got wonderful stories about birth, amazing stories, and I got amazing stories about place. But I saw there was a gap. I saw that there was no connection between birth and place. And that really led me to explore further about what does place mean, for me. So I was looking at through the lens of feminist environmental humanities thinkers, primarily people like Haraway and Karen Barad. And actually it was Barad's theories around space-time mattering that made me really rethink what place is, and I came up with the idea that that is what it is, it's space, time and matter. It helped me to look at how we disentangled birth from place, so I looked at the legacy of and all that historical institutionalization through that lens. But when it came to thinking about place, I thought, this is a whole other way of thinking about it for me. And I had come across a lovely phrase called on the wisp in very early on in my research, and on the wisp means, it was a euphemistic description that women used to birth onto straw. And that got me thinking about our relationship with straw, historically, heritage, that was so, ubiquitous within our culture for a long, long time. And it was erased then, and there's a lot of interesting stories around that as well. But I started looking at what straw, the properties of straw. And it has antibacterial, it's very good for, the human body. But also, in 2022, they introduced a scheme, it's called the Straw Incorporation Measure, and they're currently paying farmers to bury straw to improve soil fertility. And so you get paid different rates depending on whether it's barley, oat, or wheat straw. And so anyway, I thought this is fascinating. So then that whole more than human, that reciprocal relationship between the body and place through straw suddenly took on this other life for me. And I could imagine that interconnection, that interconnectedness that we once had. And I wanted to consider birth politics and birth and reproductive justice as part of environmental justice concerns as we go forward. So that's what I was literally trying to embed that within our thinking. So I start imagining. So I made birthplace plaques using straw primarily. So I got straw and I also gathered some plant matter from sites. So I went around to derelict cottages in County Clare where births are very likely to have taken place. And I gathered some material and I created these birthplace plaques. There's some samples of practice ones there. And I then took them back and photographed them at those sites as a gesture. It's a gesture about the reciprocity, sort of the Robert Mull Kimmerer thinking around reciprocity between plants and the environment. But it also is a gesture towards rethinking our whole relationship to space, time, and matter, specifically for me, I suppose, in relation to birth. And that we really need to reimagine that whole relationship. And it allows us to rethink and re-engage with the current system that we're battling with, if you like, and living with, maternity system. So I have a legacy of working in that area as well, in community, socially engaged practice, and yes, activism around that. But then I also made what I was calling holobiont bowls. So I was gathering straw matter and materials and wrapping them around stones. And again, exploring that idea of the exchange between the stone and the straw, and this idea of a holobiont being an assemblage of symbiotic relationships, and thinking about people, again, I'm just throwing out the names that were coming up for me. It was people like Scott Gilbert and his whole relationship. And he at one point says that birth is a continuation of the holobiont community, but we don't live like that at all. So we separate, we have the bounded body and we have a physical environment. And I'm saying that within the more than human way of thinking, we can imagine, a bit like you were saying, that we need to imagine that interconnectedness, not just around birth, but everything. But I just happen to be focused on that. And then finally, I just started working, and Eileen's been helping me, start exploring making the bioplastics. And again, it's about thinking around how can we tell stories differently? And how can we, so I'm sort of very interested in challenging the ideologies that underpin the sort of legacies of the systems that we live with, whether it's medical or educational. And so, again, thinking about Haraway around the idea of sympoiesis, and sympoiesis means making with, but how do we make with? How do we shift our human-centric thinking? So this is what I'm really interested in. How do we start to think with materials, through materials, in a whole other way, you know, not for us. It's not all about us, you know. So I was thinking about what would sympoetic storytelling be like? And it's sort of that kind of marriage of all kinds of stories. And so I've been making and messing around with dandelions and using dandelion seeds as part of making in plastics. And I'm really just exploring that at the moment and wanting to develop it. And the reason of playing with dandelions was that the dandelion is associated with fertility, with Bridget. And you see pictures of, that's the flower associated with her. So I was thinking, well, there's all these lovely stories around, fertility. And then you also see Bridget, the image of Bridget, and she's also associated with, obviously, spring, 1st of February, and the lamb. And one of the things that I love about dandelion is that dandelions are galactagogues, so they help produce, breast milk. But they help produce breast milk in humans, but also in ewes, which is another reason that is associated with Bridget. So it reminds us of our animacy. And I was sort of thinking, well, we need to rebuild and rethink, so maybe have more sympoetic storytelling, where we start to really reweave these stories and rebraid them. And that's sort of where I've gotten to with it.
That's very inspiring. I'm thinking, like just to have a crazy jump. When thinking about straws and the fact that relearning the use and everything, it's a big jump. But I believe that there is some project regarding what is considered waste, but is actually, isn't it? I don't know, I was reading about your, oh, sorry. There is like,
So, like to produce these materials, someone was asking me how expensive it is, and one of the reasons why we don't see more of bioplastic, biologically produced material that can be used for various things, is the price. It's the price to make it. And a lot of the cost is associated with the feedstock that we're using. So we need to provide some food to bacteria to make them, grow and make plastic. And if you're using pure resources, sugar, for example, that bacteria love to use, that's very expensive. So we started looking at side residues and waste residues as a potential feedstock. And I did mention dairy industry, so we are working with some dairy companies where they say, well, we extracted all the value from from milk, right? They used what they needed to make butter, to make cheese, to make all the valuable products. Then they said, oh, but then we can turn this into whey powder, so, it will boost it's very rich in protein, and we can sell that and earn a lot of money, but they still have waste residue. And they want to earn more money from that waste residue. What's great for us is that waste residue is still rich in sugar that cannot be accessed for anything else, but bacteria can use it, right? So we can then use something that's essentially of no use and it's waste to produce this biodegradable plastic. And we were looking at ways, how can we put more value on post-consumer plastic. So the plastic bottles, for example. What's very neat about these plastics bottles is that the monomers, so individual magnets, the way they're connected, these bonds are similar to what's present in nature. So once again, we're turned back to nature. And we realized that a lot of microorganisms have enzymes that help them break down these natural polymers. So if you look at the tree, for example, the main kind of part of a tree is lignocellulose. So lignin and cellulose. Cellulose is pretty much polymer of glucose, so sugar, and lignin has so much diversity in it. I think there's no same lignin when you look at different species. But what's common for them is the type of bonds. So we know that bacteria can recognize these bonds and they can break them down. It's very difficult for us to break down those bonds, but bacteria can and fungi can. So we then thought, well, not me, but people that were much smarter than me, they were like, well, can we try to break down bonds in PET bottle? And what can we do? What can we get as a result? It turns out you can kind of repurpose natural machinery of microorganisms to break down something that's not natural. And then you can break it down to starting units. And now in France, they're building a plant where they're going to use that process, so biologically breaking down PET material. But their business model is to take out one of the molecules and use it again to make PET bottles. And we were thinking, okay, that makes sense, but we were thinking, can we actually now give that as a feedstock to our bacteria and make bioplastics? So we were successful, and we were able to convert petrochemical plastic into biodegradable plastic. So using natural machinery that microorganisms have to break down petrochemical plastic, and then use that kind of soup to feed bacteria and produce biodegradable plastic. We call it upcycling.